There are towns that live and towns that rot. Salem's Lot was one of the latter. Stephen King once said that the town knows everything about you and forgets nothing. And in that small whisper lies the marrow of human fear, not the monster at the window, but the neighbors watching from behind their curtains. A house, a town, a mind. They're built the same way. Foundations laid not on stone, but on memory, resentment, betrayal. And what rots beneath the floorboards of a town will eventually rise through its walls, just as what festers inside us will spill into our choices. The scariest thing about Salem's Lot wasn't the vampires, it was how naturally the people surrendered to them. As if darkness was already their neighbor, and the fangs were just a formality. Fear, when left unchecked, becomes architecture. It builds cathedrals inside the mind, rooms where shame echoes like footsteps and secrets breed like mold. We learn early that fear isn't always screaming in our face. It's often silent, disguised as obedience, as politeness, as the desperate desire to be accepted. People in Salem's Lot feared standing out more than they feared being devoured. And isn't that the same with us? How often do we silence ourselves just to belong, even if belonging means slowly feeding the monster with pieces of our soul? We talk about evil as though it were an invader, something foreign. But in truth, evil is familiar. It's stitched into gossip, folded into bargains, whispered in the space between what we know and what we dare not say. And so morality, in a place like this, becomes flexible. A man can look away from screams at night if he convinces himself it's none of his business. A woman can dismiss the bruises on her neighbor's arms if she reminds herself that marriage is private. We have mastered the art of rationalization, each compromise a brick in the wall that separates who we are from who we think we are. In Salem's Lot, people told themselves they were powerless, when in truth, they were complicit. They were not just bitten by vampires, they invited them in. And that is the criminal psychology of most mistakes. We tell ourselves we have no choice, when in fact we make one, every time. Understanding this doesn't make us saints, it makes us accountable. Fear asks us to justify. Morality asks us to resist, but resistance comes at a cost: alienation, ridicule, even danger. Ben Mears, the writer who returned to the lot, understood that courage isn't born from safety, it's born from the absence of it. He faced not only the house that devoured lives, but the truth that townsfolk would sooner betray him than confront what terrified them. And this is the essence of human morality, doing what terrifies us even when the crowd chants for surrender. If you strip away the Gothic windows and the darkened streets, what Salem's Lot teaches us is the courage to stand against the tide of easy compromise. Yet what drives us to betray ourselves is not always fear of death, but fear of meaninglessness. The townsfolk clung to routines even as their town fell into shadow. The bar still opened. The gossip still flowed. The store still sold cigarettes and bread. People prefer the illusion of normalcy even as their world collapses. We all do. Because if we admit to the collapse, if we admit that something monstrous walks among us, or worse, within us, then we must admit we lived too long in denial. And denial is a comfortable coffin, but purpose, real purpose, is forged in fire. It isn't born from comfort or safety. It is carved from suffering, from risk, from the willingness to hold a candle even when the wind howls against it. In Salem's Lot, the few who resisted, the ones who chose action over silence, were not free of terror. They were simply unwilling to be defined by it, To act immediately at the peak of fear is the truest form of bravery. Because when emotions surge like a flood, you either let them drown you or you learn to swim. The mistake most people make is waiting for calm. But calm never comes. Only choices do. And so compassion becomes both weapon and wound. Compassion is not weakness, it is clarity. The vision to see that every monster was once a person, every oppressor once oppressed, every villain once desperate to belong. Even Barlow, the ancient evil in Salem's lot, is terrifying not just because of his hunger, but because of how easily people gave themselves to him. They were lonely, broken, bitter, and he offered them belonging in the dark. Isn't that the cruelest trick of evil? Not to destroy us from the outside, but to seduce the hollow spaces within. Compassion allows us to see the roots of another's corruption, but it also forces us to confront the fragile, breakable child inside our own cruelty. And here is where inner turmoil blossoms into something unbearable. Because once we recognize that evil is not just out there, but alive inside us, the war shifts. We are no longer fighting just the shadows on the wall. We are fighting our reflection. Every lie we told to protect ourselves, every silence we wrapped around someone else's suffering, every secret we kept because we feared the truth would undo us. Those are our vampires. The house in Salem's lot that feeds on secrets is not just fiction. It is every house we have ever built out of denial, every friendship we have let rot from dishonesty, every family we have fractured with silence. The windows may be different, but the walls are the same, and so emotional turmoil becomes not an accident, but a choice. Do we keep feeding the house? Feeding our fears, our secrets, our betrayals? Or do we risk setting fire to it? Fire destroys, yes, but it also purifies. Sometimes the only way to reclaim ourselves is to burn down the illusions we've spent years constructing in Salem's lot. Fire was both ending and salvation. And maybe that's the lesson for us, to recognize that our lives will be consumed by something. Either the house we build on lies or the flame we choose to ignite in truth. The real terror isn't the monster in the shadows. It's the question the story leaves us with. When your house begins to feed on secrets, when the walls creak with all that you've hidden, will you keep feeding it, or will you strike the match? Secrets are never silent. No matter how carefully you bury them, they seep, like blood through floorboards, like whispers through a small-town diner, like the chill that creeps into a bedroom at 3 a.m. Salem's lot thrived on secrets, adultery behind curtained windows, debts hushed between neighbors, cruelties brushed under the rug in the name of keeping up appearances. And when the vampires came, those secrets became doorways. Evil doesn't force its way in. It waits patiently, knowing the cracks in a person's soul will eventually open wide enough to slip through. The psychology of mistakes is built on the same principle. Rarely do we stumble into ruin by accident. We prepare the ground ourselves, slowly, thought by thought, compromise by compromise. There is a moment in every downfall where a choice could have been different. A man could have spoken instead of staying silent. A woman could have walked away instead of letting the lie harden inside her. A town could have stood together instead of fracturing apart. Yet most people never recognize that moment until it is long past. And this is the most haunting lesson Salem's lot offers. We don't lose our souls all at once. We trade them in small pieces. Each secret is a coin slipped into the monster's hand. And by the time we notice we are bankrupt, it is already too late. Criminal psychology calls this incremental descent, the way small acts accumulate until the individual no longer recognizes themselves. But isn't that the story of every human error? Not a leap into darkness, but a slow walk. And what feeds that walk is pressure, the invisible weight of conformity, the crushing need to appear normal in a place where normal is nothing more than a performance. In Salem's Lot, people smiled through their rotting teeth, laughed through their loneliness, raised glasses in bars while their shadows twisted. We are taught to endure, to keep quiet, to hold the facade intact, even when it suffocates us. Pressure doesn't always come with shouting. It often arrives as expectation. Be a good neighbor, be a loyal spouse, be a devoted parent. But what happens when fulfilling those roles means betraying yourself? What happens when the rules we live by are cages, and we choose imprisonment rather than exile? Pressure is the silent accomplice to every crime of the spirit. To resist it is to endure exile, and few are willing. But those who do find a strange clarity, Ben Mears, Susan Norton, Mark Petrie, the few who chose action over silence, were not extraordinary. They were ordinary people who understood that extraordinary evil thrives in ordinary obedience. And that is perhaps the most terrifying truth. Courage is not a gift bestowed upon the chosen. It is a decision made in terror. It is the refusal to wait for someone else to stand first. Imagine your own life, the times you swallowed words that might have stopped cruelty, the times you nodded when you wanted to scream, the times you stayed when you should have run. How many of those moments were small deaths, pieces of yourself fed to the house? But courage, when acted upon, reveals something else: the power of resistance. Evil is not omnipotent. It relies on consent, on silence, on the lie that nothing can be done. In Salem's Lot, every victim had a moment where they could have turned away, where they could have said no, where they could have refused the invitation, and some did. Their defiance may not have saved the town, but it saved something far more important: their humanity. To act at the height of fear is to reclaim yourself, to snatch back the part of your soul already halfway devoured. That is the antidote to pressure, not the illusion of safety, but the choice to risk everything rather than become nothing. Still, action is never clean. Compassion complicates it. To fight the darkness, you must sometimes wound those already ensnared by it. A friend turned vampire, a spouse transformed, a child corrupted by the hunger of the night. The knife of compassion cuts both ways. It makes you hesitate, but it also prevents you from becoming the very thing you fight. And in that hesitation lies the essence of being human. We are not machines of morality. We are torn, trembling creatures who must weigh love against survival, mercy against truth. To live without that turmoil would be easier, but it would also strip us of what makes us human. And yet turmoil, left unresolved, becomes paralysis. How many people in Salem's Lot froze when the knocking came at the window, when the whisper called their name, when the child they loved stood pale and begging at the threshold? How many people freeze every day in their own lives, staring at decisions they cannot bear to make? We call it indecision. But indecision is also decision, a choice to let time make the choice for us. And time is never merciful. Time always sides with entropy, with decay, with the slow encroachment of what we fear most, When you do not decide, the house decides for you, and its hunger is infinite. So the question becomes, how much of your life is lived by your own design, and how much by the silent will of others, by the unspoken expectations, by the fears you have allowed to nest in your walls? The house that feeds on secrets is not confined to Salem's lot. It exists inside you, inside me, inside every community where truth is feared more than lies. The boards creak, the paint peels, the air stinks of mold. And every time we refuse to face ourselves, we add another plank to its structure. The outcome of living this way is always the same. The house consumes. First your honesty, then your courage, then your compassion. And what remains is a husk, alive in body, but hollow in spirit. Some call it apathy, others call it despair. But whatever the name, it is death while still breathing. And if that fate doesn't terrify you more than fangs at the window, perhaps you have already fed your last secret to the house. And here lies the cruel symmetry of the human heart. What we most fear is often what we most become. In Salem's lot, the townspeople feared the shadows, but the real infection was not in their throats. It was in their choices. A vampire doesn't always need to drink blood to own you. Sometimes it only needs your silence. And silence, repeated enough times, becomes a ritual. You light candles for your own helplessness. You pray not to God, but to the illusion that someone else will do the hard thing for you. And while you wait, your soul withers. We tell ourselves stories to make this bearable, that our mistakes are accidents, that we didn't mean to, that the world forced us. But the truth is simpler and sharper. Every mistake begins with permission. We permit ourselves to look away. We permit ourselves to justify. We permit ourselves to forget. And in that permission grows rot. As certain as weeds sprouting in an abandoned yard. This is the criminal psychology of ordinary lives, the belief that harm comes only from active malice, when in reality it comes just as often from passive neglect. The drunk driver didn't plan the accident, but he chose the drink. The bystander didn't plan the tragedy, but she chose the silence. The lot didn't plan to collapse, but every citizen contributed to the foundation of its ruin. There is, however, a way forward, one that burns, one that demands everything. To recognize that secrets feed monsters is to recognize that truth starves them, and truth is always painful. It claws at us. It humiliates us. It forces us to stand naked before the people we tried to impress, the community we tried to appease, the image we tried to uphold. But truth is also oxygen, and without it, the house suffocates. Imagine your life stripped of every secret, terrifying, yes, but also freeing. What could hurt you if there was nothing left to hide? But people prefer the house. They prefer the comfort of shadows, even when those shadows choke them. This is the paradox of humanity. We long for freedom, but we cling to cages. And each time we do, the cage grows stronger, the bars thicker, the lock more intricate. What Salem's Lot teaches is that sometimes survival means tearing down the cage, even if it cuts your hands, even if it burns your home, even if it leaves you standing in the ashes with nothing but your own raw truth. Because ashes, at least, are honest. Consider the boy, Mark Petrie, who fought harder than men twice his age. He was not weighed down yet by decades of excuses, by the rust of conformity. He acted because he had not yet learned the cowardice of waiting. And isn't that the tragedy? That as we grow older, we grow less willing to risk? Children see monsters and scream. Adults see monsters and smile politely. Which of the two do you think evil prefers? The inner turmoil of this realization is unbearable. To admit that every compromise, every withheld truth, every silence has made us accomplices to the very darkness we claim to despise. To admit that the evil we fear is not just external, but stitched into the fabric of who we are. And yet, there is strength in this recognition. Because when you know the monster is part of you, you no longer waste time waiting for heroes to arrive. You either fight or you surrender. This is the fulcrum of emotional struggle. The knowledge that you are both victim and perpetrator, both haunted and haunting. The townsfolk of Salem's lot were not just prey, they were partners in their own undoing. And perhaps so are we. Every time we weaponize contempt against someone weaker, every time we laugh at another's humiliation, every time we close our eyes to injustice, we become the vampire at the window. We think ourselves victims of systems, of circumstances, of fate. But sometimes we are the system. Sometimes we are the fate. So what is left? Purpose. To choose a purpose that is not born of convenience, but of courage, to strike matches in dark houses, even when the flames might consume us too. To tell the truth, even when it costs us the approval of everyone who wanted us silent. To act while fear claws at our ribs, instead of waiting for courage to arrive like a gift. This is not easy, it is excruciating. But easy is the path of the lot, the path of secrecy, the path of decay. And when the flames rise, because eventually they must, we will discover that fire is not only destruction, but renewal. The house that feeds on secrets cannot survive the blaze of truth. Salem's lot burned, and from its ashes came the bitter, brutal knowledge that survival demands sacrifice. And isn't that what life always demands? To give up comfort for clarity, to give up belonging for integrity, to give up safety for freedom. The lesson is not that monsters are inevitable, but that surrender is. Evil will always knock. The only question is whether you open the door. And so I leave you with this. When the knock comes, whether it wears the face of conformity, of cruelty, of temptation, or of silence, will you keep feeding the house that devours you, or will you burn it to the ground, even if you must live forever in the ruins, because the ruins, at least, will be yours?